I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you took me in. Naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came unto me. It's very clear that as we look around in the world, there's a great deal of suffering. Compassion is the wish for the removal of suffering in other human beings or in ourselves. And in a very profound sense, compassion is our true nature. When we get beyond all those things that bind our heart, there is compassion shining. And yet that quote I just read, how difficult it is at times to take that stranger into our heart. For the removal is to feed someone else when we're not always entirely sure that we even have enough for our own self. To find that trust that there truly is enough, that in giving that compassion, in opening our hearts in love in that way, that we are truly filled. There's a Tibetan Lama named Kalu. Some of you probably know him. He was staying at the home of some friends of ours in Cambridge, Massachusetts a few years ago. As he was staying there, a Cambridge women's spiritualist group came to visit him. I don't know if you can quite picture what a Cambridge women's spiritual group is like, but older women interested in psychic phenomena. And they had heard about his reputation and were very interested in seeing this great man. So they came and said, "Can you read our minds?" He said, "No, I can't read your minds." They said, "Well, can you fly?" He probably could fly, but he said, "No, I can't fly." They asked him a few more questions about whether he had this supernatural power or that supernatural power. And to each question he responded, "No, I really can't do that." And in frustration, thinking of him as this very evolved, extraordinary being, they said, "Well, what is it that you can do?" And he said, "All I do is practice compassion for all beings." Think what it must be like to be in an incarnation where all you're doing is going around blessing people. The people that are easy to bless, the people that are hard to bless, people just going down the street. Later, my friends took him to the Boston Aquarium, which is a very fine aquarium. And he would come up to each tank of fish and whatever else is in an aquarium, and he'd knock on the tank a little bit. They said, "Well, what are you doing?" He was doing this, he was saying his mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. And he said, "Well, I'm blessing the beings in that tank. I'm calling their attention so I can bless them, even the fish." Tonight we're going to have an evening on social responsibility, on how to apply compassion in our daily life. But this morning we'll be talking a little bit more in terms of our work deep in our own heart. Let's look a little bit more at what compassion is not. When I see suffering out there, different ways to react to it. The first way that I see, maybe the most obvious way, is what I call separation. You see somebody suffering, and there's some kind of intuitive sense that if you open up to that too deeply, you're going to suffer yourself. Maybe there isn't really two of us, that if you open up to that other person, it's going to hurt both of us in some sense. So that with that attitude, we create some kind of an armoring to hold suffering off at a distance, to keep it manageable. When you're walking down the sidewalk in any large city, and probably not so large city in this country, and you look into the eyes of people coming the other way, almost everyone is armored from your suffering, from their own suffering. There's so much of it that it takes a very deep work on oneself, a constant opening to not close to that suffering. Many people who professionally work with sick people, dying people, suffering people in one way or the other, have learned over the course of their practice that one way to survive is by closing themselves, by having a professional demeanor with their patients, with their clients. The problem is that when one goes home after a day at the office, and there is your wife and there is your child, very difficult to turn the switch and turn the love back on again. I think we all know far too many people who, just in the service of defending themselves, have closed. Before I go on to the other ways of dealing with suffering, I'd like to really emphasize that when one sees oneself separating, closing off, pushing away, there's no need to judge. That even though this isn't yet true compassion, that we also have to have true compassion for ourselves. And just the condition of being in a human body, being on this plane, is the work of learning compassion. So that when we see someone telling their story in this very room, or when we leave here and we go home and we've come from this very precious environment, and there are people out there who are not tuned into the sensitivity that maybe has been refined here to a certain extent, and it would be easy to start judging yourself, judging other people. It's just the way it is. This framework is not so real. It's just a way of seeing things a little more clearly, have something to work with a little bit. The second way of dealing with suffering could be called pity or identification. Sort of the other polar extreme from pushing someone completely away. In the service of trying to open up to another human being's suffering, we take the suffering inside, feel the emotional quality of it, and get caught in it. Not much space around it. Ram Dass has a real nice metaphor of our mind being like a window, looking out at the clear blue sky, infinite sky. And in the sky, clouds come passing through, and the window frame we're looking through sometimes sees these clouds. If the cloud is big enough, all you see in the window frame is cloud, gray cloud, white cloud, whatever it might be. No space of sky around the cloud. So if we see someone who's suffering, like the window of our mind is small, all we see is that suffering. We take it inside, all we become is that suffering. But if through prayer, our relationship with God, meditative practice, that window becomes expanded, then we see that blue sky. We see the vastness that contains each cloud that comes and goes. We see the movement of the cloud as it comes and goes. We don't need to get quite so identified. I don't quite remember if I told the story here a few days ago about when I was sick, how everyone came who saw me and was saying, "Poor Dale." I was almost dying at that point, and everybody was caught in the fact that I had hepatitis. No one could see me as a human being. The spacious sky around that cloud of the fact that I was feeling really lousy. Until finally someone came who just played with me, and it was such a relief. But think about it for a second. If you were someone who were really suffering, and someone came to you in the service of, "I want to help you," and they jumped into your predicament as completely as you were caught yourself, and they were as caught in the emotionality of it as you were, they really wouldn't be able to be very available to serve you, to be there for you, just as they wouldn't be able to be there for you if they were pushing you away. So in this second modality that we're talking about, pity, identification, there's a real potential for burnout. Those of you particularly who spend a lot of time working with suffering, to the extent that you really buy into it as being completely real, it's going to really hurt. You feel it in your own body, you feel it in your own heart. And to the extent that we push it away, pushing you, it's going to take a lot of our energy that could be used in serving that other person. So the third possibility, clearly, is, in some sense, the balance of these other two. It's compassion. Not pushing away, opening up so fully to another human being that you feel in your own gut, in your own heart, where it is that it hurts them. And even beyond that, realizing that it's not you and them. Your pain is my pain, is our pain. Opening up to the very human quality that being on this plane entails. But at the same time, having a perspective that, in some sense, even though the suffering is there, it is taking place in the vastness of God's perfection. When I talk about this, people say, well, how do you do that? In some sense, that is what this retreat is about. Dying into life.